There is a ruthless rhythm in the world of the narcissist, a sophisticated loop disguised as love. It all begins with tender eyes, with promises that seem to come from the most genuine soul, yet every moment is merely a replica of an old script. Faces change, voices change, settings change, but the story never does. Because deep down, the narcissist does not love you, nor the one who comes after you. They love the reflection of themselves they see in another. What they crave is not connection, but a talking mirror, a mirror that can confirm they are still perfect, still worthy of worship. Every new supply is not a beginning, but a repetition, a wound reopened beneath a fresh coat of paint. They do not see the real person before them, they only see an escape from the emptiness within. As Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. For the narcissist, that fate is the endless repetition of the same wound, a pain they cannot bear to feel, so they inflict it upon others instead. And with every cycle, they believe they are starting a new story, when in truth they are merely wandering in circles inside the labyrinth of their own shadow. This is where love turns into illusion, and illusion becomes a prison. Only when one awakens, seeing the pattern not through emotion but through awareness, can the cycle finally be broken. To truly understand this merciless cycle, we must look at it from two angles. The first is the case of someone truly new, someone who has never experienced the subtle manipulations of a narcissist, who has no concept of psychological abuse, who has never seen the red flags hidden beneath the initial charm. They step into the relationship like stepping into a dream, full of promise, passion, and the intoxicating illusion of true love. But it is precisely this innocence that makes them the perfect target. The narcissist sees in them a pristine mirror, one still clean enough to reflect the light they themselves have lost. And thus, the game begins gently, gracefully, seemingly harmless. Like a cat playing with a new toy, the narcissist begins with curiosity, tenderness, and affection, until slowly the claws emerge. In the early phase, they are intoxicated by this fresh supply, because every reaction, every admiring glance, every compliment from the new person becomes new fuel to sustain their hollow ego. The newcomer, naive and unguarded, has no idea they are merely the next chapter in the same repeating script: idealization, devaluation, and discard. And as we know, discard in the narcissist's world is never a true ending. It is merely a pause button, a temporary break while they reorganize their power, waiting for the right time to return for more energy. What's most terrifying is that when they meet someone truly new, everything escalates. They become more romantic, more dramatic, more impossibly sweet. But nothing is accidental. Every word, every gesture is calculated to craft a perfect illusion, a stage where the victim believes they have met the love of their life, when in truth, they have merely stepped into another version of the same cycle, performed by a different face. The second case, far more common, is when the new supply isn't new at all. They are someone who was once discarded, deeply hurt, and yet pulled back into the same familiar spiral. The narcissist once loved you, idealized you, called you the most special one, and then one day left cold, abrupt, and inhumanly detached. They vanished, or worse, flaunted someone new, leaving you drowning in betrayal and the agony of being replaced. But it was never truly the end. For them, leaving is not closure. It is strategy, a test of power. They want to see if you can truly escape, if you still orbit around them emotionally. And when they sense that you are rising, that your energy no longer revolves around them, that you've begun to reclaim yourself, they return. Not out of love, but out of hunger for control. Their return always comes wrapped in sweetness, the sugar-coated disguise of remorse. They message you, apologize, admit to mistakes, even cry, reminiscing about the beautiful moments you shared, as if love alone could fix everything. But beneath it all, this is not awakening, it is strategy. They are reactivating the emotional bond that once made you weak. They know exactly what softens you. The words, the looks, the lines. I've changed. You're the only one who truly understands me. And so, you open the door, even if just a crack. That's all they need to step back in. This phase is often more dangerous than the first, because now they know your weak points, what scares you, what wounds you, and they use those very things to keep you under control. Their comeback is less glamorous, more refined, and even more convincing, as if they've learned something from the pain. But if you look closely, it's all the same cycle, only slower, smoother, more psychologically precise. They may now play the victim, act fragile, even claim they were hurt by the way you left, all to awaken guilt within you. And once that guilt returns, you're back in the maze where compassion becomes a leash and love becomes a chain. In Jungian psychology, this is called trauma reenactment, the unconscious compulsion to repeat old wounds in hopes of finally ending them differently. You believe that if you love them the right way this time, if you stay calm, if you give more understanding, you can heal the relationship. But in truth, you are repeating your own unfinished lesson. The narcissist doesn't return to make things right. They return to prove you still belong to them. They want you to believe that no matter how far you go, you will never be free. That belief is the lifeblood of their fragile ego, the reassurance that they still have the power to hurt you, to define your worth. Those who have lived through this loop all say the same thing. The return is always worse than the first time. The reason is simple. They no longer need to build trust from scratch. They just have to knock on the familiar door in your heart. And they know you haven't fully closed it. When they come back, they don't need a love-bombing storm. Just a few kind words, a compliment, a tender touch, and the old attachment system reactivates. You're no longer just in love, you're addicted. And addiction is the deepest form of dependence. But regardless of which case it is, there's one brutal truth you must understand. For the narcissist, there is never a truly new beginning. Every relationship is a rebirth of the same play, a search for yet another mirror to sustain their illusion of self. When they meet a new supply, they don't see a human being. They see a blank canvas upon which they can paint themselves in their most flattering colors. At first, they appear to be the soulmate you've always dreamed of, attentive, insightful, tender, and eerily attuned to your every emotion. But in reality, this is the soul-probing phase where the narcissist gathers emotional data to manufacture a counterfeit version of love. They study every glance, every reaction, every story about your fears, past and dreams, and then use that knowledge to mirror it all back perfectly. This reflection isn't meant to connect, it's meant to conquer. Because when you believe someone understands you so completely, you drop your guard and invite them into sacred spaces of your soul that should have remained yours alone. That is the moment they seize control. On a deeper level, Jung called this the shadow imitating the light, when the unhealed part of a person masquerades as illumination in order to feed on others' energy. The narcissist doesn't create love, they borrow it. They siphon life from others to sustain their hollow self. The new supply becomes a mirror, oxygen, fuel, never a beloved. And within those seemingly perfect early days, the seed of pain is already planted. Because real love cannot be born from imitation. It can only exist in authenticity. When someone must become another's fantasy in order to be loved, they are not loved for who they are, but for how accurately they reflect what the other wants to see. That is the beginning of destruction, wrapped in honey. And it is that very perfection that blinds the new supply. Most they mistake idealization for intimacy. The more beautiful the illusion, the harder the fall. And when the narcissist feels you fully surrendered, when your energy begins to orbit around them, the next phase begins. Love turns into a weapon, and your light begins to suffocate. Once they have collected enough emotional data, the narcissist enters their favorite stage, emotional control, through perceptual reversal. Everything still appears sweet on the surface, but the energy shifts. Their affection becomes conditional. Every smile, every compliment, every embrace becomes currency traded for obedience. The new supply begins to sense something strange, subtle, almost invisible, as if their soul is being drained without knowing why. That is when the illusion begins to crack, even as the exterior still glows like a perfect painting. The narcissist won't attack outright. They know their power lies in subtlety. Instead of sudden cruelty, they let the victim doubt themselves. A misplaced comment, A cold glance, a prolonged silence, tiny fractures that erode trust. They make the other person ask, did I do something wrong? Are they angry with me? Am I too sensitive? It is within this fog of confusion that power shifts. The narcissist seeks control without command, submission disguised as choice. This stage, in Jung's language, is the moment when the shadow possesses the light. When someone believes they are loved because they are special, they will do anything to keep that feeling. And the narcissist understands this better than anyone. They begin to withdraw the very affection that once intoxicated their partner, only to reintroduce it selectively like a psychological experiment of reward and punishment. One day they are tender, the next they are cold. In the morning they whisper, "You're everything to me." By nightfall they act as though you don't exist. The manipulated person's body reacts like an addict in withdrawal, craving the return of that first happy stage, not realizing that this craving is what keeps them caged. This emotional conditioning is one of the most powerful, addictive mechanisms in psychology. Every time the narcissist gives a small dose of attention, the brain releases dopamine, just like a gambler's rush after countless losses. Love becomes a Pavlovian reflex, where affection is a reward for obedience. The more confused and insecure the new supply becomes, the tighter they cling to the very person causing the confusion. This is the paradox of every toxic bond. The abuser is also the one most deeply trusted. But the true turning point of this stage is not in repeated behaviors. It lies in the transformation of emotional nature. By now, the new supply is no longer the idealized muse, but a mirror reflecting the narcissist's repressed contempt. Jung once wrote, "Whatever we deny in ourselves, we project onto others. When you become too real, when you no longer fit the illusion, they project their own denied shame, weakness, and imperfection onto you. They begin to punish you for your authenticity. A truthful comment, a small boundary, even a neutral action can become an excuse for blame. Why have you changed? You're not the same anymore. You're disappointing me." These aren't words of communication, they're words of programming. The narcissist is rewriting reality to ensure that only they define what is right, wrong, or love. This is when gaslighting becomes fully operational. The victim gradually loses faith in their own emotions. When they're sad, they're told they're too sensitive. When they're angry, they're accused of being out of control. When they're quiet, they're labeled distant. Slowly, their inner world is replaced by the narcissist's version of reality. And here a new kind of slavery is born, not with chains, but with self-doubt. To keep you trapped, all they need to do is make you question yourself. The breaking of the illusion is not only painful for the victim, it is also the beginning of the narcissist's silent collapse. When they sense the supply of idealization fading, panic sets in. Beneath their mask of confidence lies a deep fear, the moment you see through them. For the narcissist, being exposed equals psychological death. That is when their hollow ego screams to survive feeding on power. And power only exists when others submit, so they intensify the manipulation. They start comparing you to exes, revisiting old wounds, planting seeds of jealousy, all to awaken your fear of losing a love that never truly existed. The narcissist knows that love may fade, but the fear of losing love can last forever, and that fear is the strongest leash of all. At a deeper level, this is what Jungian psychology calls wound transference, the projection of one's own guilt, shame, and weakness onto another to avoid facing the inner shadow. In Jung's terms, this is shadow possession, when a person becomes overtaken by their own darkness and begins to act as its instrument. In this stage, the narcissist no longer loves, no longer pretends. They become the embodiment of the very fear they've been running from, primal shame. They attack not because they hate you, but because you remind them of what they cannot bear, feeling unworthy, unloved, unreal. And the cruelest irony is this: the person they attack is often the only one who ever saw the best in them. As time goes on, their manipulation becomes more refined. When they sense you pulling away, they launch another storm of sweetness, a miniature love-bombing session. They apologize, they cry, they talk about their painful childhood. They tell you they need you to change, but it isn't remorse, it's a power reset. The moment you soften, the cycle restarts. Jung called this in Antiodromia the phenomenon where every extreme eventually turns into its opposite. Love becomes hate and then morphs back into pleading. For the narcissist, there is no straight line, only a spiral, forever looping between idealization and devaluation. They live trapped inside the vortex of their own shadow, spinning endlessly, yet going nowhere. The most painful part is that the new supply often doesn't even realize they are being harmed. They justify the narcissist's actions. Everyone has issues. He's just stressed. Things will change if I love harder. Their kindness and empathy become open doors for manipulation. The empath believes that love can heal anything. For the narcissist, love is simply fuel for power. The more you love, the weaker you become. The more you forgive, the deeper the control. The more silently you endure, the more they believe you're willing to sacrifice yourself to keep the illusion intact. And so, the illusion doesn't just crack it, weaponizes. When this cycle repeats long enough, the victim experiences a kind of ego dissolution. They can no longer tell which emotions are real and which are programmed responses. They begin to morph into the version the narcissist wants them to be. The way they dress, speak, even think is shaped to avoid provoking conflict. This is what Jung called identification with another's shadow, when one soul dissolves into the distorted reality of another. The empath is no longer themselves. They become a reflection, a mere extension of the narcissist existing only to mirror. When the fracture reaches its peak, the narcissist triggers the final act of this stage, the discard. They vanish, withdraw, or turn cold, as if the relationship never existed. But beneath the surface, this isn't the end, it's an intermission. In their mind, every source of supply is recyclable. They don't leave because they're bored. They leave because they need a new mirror to reconstruct their self-image through another reflection. And you, the one left behind, carry more than heartbreak. You carry their wound, transferred and embedded in your psyche like a memory that was never yours. When Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious," he was speaking of this very moment. As long as the empath fails to see the pattern, still believing that the new one will be different, that next time it will be real love, the cycle continues. The narcissist only changes actors. The script remains the same. And with every new beginning, another soul becomes yet another fracture in the endless mirror of their broken self. If we look deeper beyond anger or resentment, we'll see a truth that is both cold and profoundly human. They hurt others because they never learned how to love. They wound because they themselves are an unhealed wound. That doesn't excuse their behavior, but it helps us understand why revenge never ends the cycle, only awareness does. And when you realize your love was not betrayed but distorted, you begin to reclaim your spiritual sovereignty. You no longer need to be a mirror in which someone sees themselves. You choose to become light again, self-luminous, not reflective. After each cycle, when the narcissistic storm passes, what remains is not only pain but a strange emptiness. The hurt one no longer knows who they are, what is real, what is illusion. Yet in that quiet, something deep begins to move. It is not the scream of injury, but the whisper of awareness, a vague, steady call. Look, look clearly. At first, the empath resists, afraid that if they look too closely, they will find the part of themselves that allowed it to happen. But that is precisely the threshold of awakening, the moment the soul begins to detach from the hypnotic spell of the manipulator. Now the narcissist's image loses its pull. The lines that once made your heart tremble become hollow echoes. Apologies and seemingly sincere gestures reveal their artificial core. The empath gradually sees that each act of forgiveness wasn't granted because the other deserved it, but because they themselves feared losing their own sense of meaning. They had fused their identity with the role of healer, savior, and now they see that the unconditional love they were proud of had become an unconscious collusion with shadow. They no longer want to be a rescuer, they want peace. In that instant, power begins to shift. The narcissist senses it before anyone else. They feel your energy retract, see that your eyes no longer reflect their image. To them, this is a psychological death. For, as Jung noted, their ego exists through the gaze of others. When that gaze withdraws, the mask begins to crack, so they react. They grow restless, erratic, even desperate. They revive tender memories, speak of happy times, of the us that once was not because they miss you, but because they need to restore the old emotional matrix. They need you back in the role of the mirror. This is the hoovering phase when the narcissist tries to pull you back with the language of memory. But a soul that has begun to wake is no longer easily hypnotized. You see the performance. You hear the tremor in their voice, yet feel no compulsion to soothe it. You observe without reacting, listen without dissolving. It is precisely this silence that panics them. Because your silence is no longer a weak void, it is a wall of awareness. It isn't indifference, it is sacred differentiation. This is what Jung called the separation of the opposites, when consciousness stands apart from the shadow to observe without identifying. And in that state, you grasp a painful but liberating truth. Your love was never betrayed, it was merely consumed the wrong way. This recognition changes your inner architecture completely. Instead of asking, why did they do this? You begin to ask, why did I stay? Not as accusation, but as understanding. You see the gaps within your need for validation, your fear of abandonment, your unconscious compassion for the wounded, all the doors through which the shadow entered. And rather than sealing them with shame, you walk through them with the light of awareness. You understand that empathy is not for saving others, but for understanding yourself. That kindness is not surrender, but discipline of the soul. This is the moment of alchemy of awareness, where pain transforms into wisdom. Once truth dawns, the narcissist has nowhere left to hide. Every tactic fails because tactics only work when you still fear loss. When fear is gone, their control ends. A paradox follows. They begin to fear you. They fear your gaze, your calm, your refusal to prove anything. Deep in their unconscious, they sense the energy reversing the power they once siphoned, now returning to its rightful owner. They will try a few more times. Pleading, anger, blame, even feigned repentance. But you can see it now. Every word, every gesture, every glance is only the echo of a soul that has never truly lived. You don't need to hate them. Hatred is still a bond. You only need to understand and release. Release here is not turning your back and storming off. It is ceasing to play the game. You no longer need them to change for you to be at peace. You realize peace isn't in them. It's in your choice. When you stop reacting, you unplug the entire power grid that sustains them. The fire of manipulation needs oxygen, your emotion to burn. You extinguish it with an aware presence. In that silence, their power dissolves. And in that very moment, you understand what Jung insisted upon. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You have made the darkness conscious, and therefore it can no longer control you. Once the narcissist realizes you have seen, they no longer have a foothold in your mind. They will seek a new target, another mirror to reflect themselves. But for you, everything has changed not because they vanish, but because you have become transparent. What once hurt now becomes the mark of maturation. You are no longer pulled back by pity, by memory, by regret. You are left with clarity. This is who they are. This is who I am. And between us there is a boundary. From that moment, your energy begins to regenerate. You sleep more deeply, breathe more fully, begin to sense the colors of the world again. No more dread when the phone rings. No more obsession over unanswered messages. No more need to over-explain to be believed. You return to yourself not as a victim, but as one who understands pain as a rite of passage. Jung called this individuation the uniting of ego and soul, in which a person becomes whole after facing and integrating the shadow. You realize you do not need to be anyone else's light. You only need to keep the light of your own. And then, at a deeper level, you begin to see the whole picture. The narcissist was not just the one who hurt you, but the one who unconsciously served as a teacher for your soul. They taught you boundaries, self-respect, how to see through illusion. They were the darkness that forced you to find the light. When you see this, hatred dissolves into stillness. You no longer need justice from the outside because you have reclaimed justice within. You no longer permit others to harm you in order to prove love. That serenity is karma reversal. The karmic loop ends not with victory, but with awakening. Once the revolving door is closed, the narcissist enters the phase they fear most, your absolute silence. For them, silence is not an ordinary absence. It is a form of spiritual resistance. It erases their sense of existence because they have only ever existed through others' gazes, reactions, and emotions. When you no longer react, argue, or explain, you inadvertently strip them of what they're addicted to most, the right to define your reality. They don't just lose someone to control, they lose the mirror that allowed them to believe they were still real. At first, they won't accept it. They twist in every direction to pull you back from gentle promises, to rage, to feigned hurt, even playing the victim. But each tactic is merely a last, desperate spasm of a dying ego. Deep down, they know something has changed. They feel the stillness of your energy, a stillness born not of fear or hatred, but of self-possession. Jung called this individuation, when one stops seeking identity in another and becomes an integrated whole. In that instant of self-mastery, the narcissist has no power. Their collapse isn't immediate. It begins as a quiet fissure. With no one left to blame, they are forced to face the shadow they have always avoided. Guilt, shame, and emptiness surge at once, and lacking the tools to process them, they run again. Some seek new supply, hoping the old loop will numb the pain. Others spiral into panic, feeling abandoned, invisible. In their mind, your silence is the ultimate punishment, because it makes them hear the echo of themselves, and that is the one sound they cannot endure. For you, the transformation continues. Your silence is no longer a tactic, but the natural state of someone who has ceased participating in an energy war. You don't need to prove, reclaim justice, or show how strong you've become. You simply live, and that is what hurts them most. To the narcissist, everything is theater. They feel powerful only when someone is watching. When you turn away, the stage goes dark. No audience, no lead role. Their entire structure, built on reflections, begins to fall. At a deeper level, this is what Jung called the death of the persona. When the outer shell is no longer fed by others' validation, it starts to crack, revealing the true inner shadow. For the narcissist, this is the deepest ego crisis, narcissistic mortification. They encounter absolute terror, the fear that beneath the mask there is nothing real. They feel empty, invisible, worthless. Unable to bear it, they seek escape by causing harm, smearing, or inventing a counterfeit version of you, the cruel one, just to preserve the illusion of their own innocence. You must understand that their collapse is not justice. It is simply the natural consequence of truth. Light does not need to avenge the dark. It only needs to appear, and the darkness dissolves. When you remain aware, refusing to fall into pity or triumph, you become the mirror that no longer reflects. Their energy stops there, finding nowhere to project itself. This is true liberation. Not when they admit their guilt, but when you no longer need their admission to be at peace. From here, a subtle transformation begins within you. You start to understand power in a new way. True power does not lie in controlling others, but in mastering your own energy. You are no longer activated by praise, nor shaken by silence. You become neutral, whole, like a still lake that reflects everything yet is disturbed by nothing. This is the state Jung called the self, the true center of being, where light and shadow unite as one. When you reach this point, the narcissist can no longer touch you, not because you've built walls, but because your frequency has changed. You no longer emit the energetic signals they can read or exploit. They may still provoke, slander, or attempt one final return, but you see them only as a stranger, an actor in an old play you no longer wish to perform. You don't need to slam the door. It closes on its own because it has no purpose anymore. And then you realize the deepest truth. They never had real power. They merely borrowed it from your attention. When you withdraw that attention, they unknowingly return that power to you. The strength you thought you lost, your voice, your trust, your peace, comes back. You begin to live again, but differently this time, not to prove, but to be. Everything that once caused you pain becomes quiet wisdom within your soul. You are no longer the victim of the story, you are the storyteller. The narcissist will continue searching for new mirrors. That is the destiny they have chosen until they are brave enough to face themselves. But your path is no longer about escaping darkness. It is about walking through it with open eyes. For you have understood that light does not need to fight. It only needs to know it is light. And when you live from that place, no power in this world can touch you again. You have become the mirror that no longer reflects where every illusion ends and truth begins.